Hi, my name is Sheena Denise, and welcome to the next episode of Spiritual Therapy for the Aquarian Age. It's funny, I keep saying spiritual therapy for the Aquarian times, but it's the Aquarian Age. Anyway, I have, so before I introduce my guest, I would just like to take a moment to acknowledge the land that we're on. So here in where OnePeopleTO, One People Toronto is, in Toronto or Toronto. And so I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the Indigenous ancestors, caretakers that have and continue to show us their ways of knowing and being and sustainability and in interconnectedness, and the ways that we all can learn how to really respect Mother Earth and each other ultimately. And I just want to just take a moment to honor the work that they have always done and continue to do. Thank you for that. And of course, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge my own angels and ancestors, spirit guides, and higher selves for their love, guidance, and protection, and teachers. Everybody's my teacher, and this woman right here is also my teacher. So I'm excited to get into questions. So this is, I will say, for transparency's sake, this is my cousin, this beautiful woman. And so I'm going to just briefly introduce, and then I'll ask her to introduce herself. So this is my cousin. Her name is Lindsey Mahoney. She is a woman of many talents and gifts.
Too kind.
Well, it's true. Yeah, it's interesting. We've been connected, and then I think like life goes like in and out, and so we've recently, not recently, a long time recently, but have reestablished our connection and the growing, that the evolution that's been happening there. So I'm really, because of that, I'm excited to have her here to have this conversation about ultimately what faith and spirituality mean to her. And hopefully I'll have her back for another episode. Anyway,
let's see how the first one
You'll get her humor in a minute. I love it. Okay, so Linz, who are you? So I invite you to speak about your identity, whether that's race, sex, your approximate age, be a decade, ethnic background, ancestral background.
Sure. So I am a 30-something woman, cisgender. I myself was born and raised in the Greater Toronto area. I proudly am a Canadian, but my family, really everyone, origin, I'm first generation Canadian, but most of my parents are from Jamaica. And one of those wonderful, interesting things of maybe not appreciating the fulsomeness of that when I was younger, but growing into that. I think that's like a little quick synopsis of me.
Right on. So then next, let's go into how are you known? So what do you do in your everyday, and do you consider it your vocation or your calling?
Try to analyze my everyday. So on a day-to-day, I make a living by being a lawyer, which I don't know. I don't think it is my calling per se, but I also can't say I fell into it. I always said I wanted to be a lawyer, but most people don't know what lawyers actually do, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I don't think anybody really knows a profession, and like not quotation, narrow profession, but an occupation until you're actually in it.
Right.
But I spend my days writing. I'm never in court. I probably don't have the personality that people think of as a lawyer. I'm soft-spoken, I like to say. Depending on who you ask at the time, vary what it is. But I don't know that it's my calling, but I enjoy it, which is a lot to be able to say that you enjoy what you do.
Definitely.
With whatever myriad of other things that comes along with it.
Can I ask what type of lawyer? Because, I will say, because, we think of like lawyers, like criminal lawyer, or
I know. People say, are you a criminal lawyer or are you a corporate lawyer? And I'm neither, because there is a multitude of different types of lawyers. I'm a securities regulatory investment lawyer, which I really just say, I guess I do a lot of writing, so I do a lot of drafting. So if you ever buy an investment, I'm probably the person who drafted the things that you're not reading that are there to protect you, in theory. So that's what I get up to day to day.
Right on.
It's narrow, I know, and it's not what people think of when they think of lawyer, but there is me on the other side.
So I have to, it's not on the sheet, but I have to ask, if you could define what your vocation or your calling is, because it could be something that you're already doing.
Yeah.
Do you know what that is, or can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the element that I can take from the law that, and I guess the industry that I work in, I'm ultimately in financial services and the financial industry, but the calling that came from working in this field for the past, I guess, 15 years or so is,
wow, has it been long?
I know. I said, maybe not. Maybe I just added some years I worked there. Let's drop it down a bit, but I think probably this 15. Is that my calling that I want to bring out of it is financial literacy, and especially financial literacy within the Black community. I worked in the industry before law school. I've worked in the education space within the industry in a legal capacity. And then now I work with a lot of people who are very learned in this space. And I'm not educating them about the substance of finance. I'm educating about the law. And even while I was in law school, I attended law school in the US. So I attended Howard University School of Law, HU, and we did a lot of work providing advice and just really basic knowledge to affinity groups, to graduate chapters of sororities and fraternities. And that's when I realized a lot that, especially in the Black community, people do not know basic financial principles. And it is such an intricate part of everyone's day. Something as simple as budgeting, something as simple as investing. I just say that everybody needs to be able to take the money they have and grow it, and that we don't learn about it. We don't talk about money in our homes. Yeah. We don't learn about it in our schools. Yeah. And so I think of anything that I do now and the aspects of what I would want to be able to do with it is probably that element. So that's the calling that comes out of this job.
Right on. Very cool. And yeah, you definitely have built the structure of that framework.
Yeah, I mean, I was fortunate that I did some work for the Canadian Association of Urban Financial Professionals, COFP, and I worked on their financial literacy work. It's a wonderful organization that supports Blacks in finance. That's probably the easiest way to describe them. And they have a pillar that is dedicated to financial literacy, and they have work that they do with school boards, and it really is all levels. There are great programs like Junior Achievers as well. Where I went into the classroom and as young as grade 3 and grade 4, teaching them about Molly has a cookie company and what does that mean? And like how does she get money? How does she sell her product? How does she grow it? How does she get a loan? Globalization, talking in a classroom to 10-year-olds.
Right.
But of course it's like, which communities is this program being offered to and things like that. So
right on. I love that. Yeah. What have you done in your life that you're most proud of?
That's a good question. And you don't think about these things unless you really asked. I'm actually very proud that I became a lawyer. As I said before, I always wanted to go into law without really much thought. But when I was in university, my mother had a very short battle with cancer. She lost her battle and she passed away a few months after being diagnosed.
And that was in 2004.
Yeah, it was in 2004. And so I was heading into my 3rd year, but at the time I remember being in her hospital room and saying, I think I was talking to her about the law, or I was looking at books about law school decline or something similar to that. And then she said to me, promise me that you're going to graduate university, you're going to go to law school. Of course, like, what are you talking about, woman? Not at that time understanding the severity of her illness, but she was aware of the state and her terminal nature of her cancer. And so I graduated university and actually went to law school, but I went with my own trauma of losing my mother in such a way and not having healed. And then as well, the reality that I was also dealing with certain health issues, that I left law school in my first semester. And I was at Howard, this was 2006.
And you're Canadian, so that whole, I just want to say that whole dynamic of
being, living in the US at any point in time. Oh, I mean, I was there during, actually no, that was the end of Bush. Right. That was the end of Bush Jr.'s first or second term. But I came back, and one of my professors, when I was leaving, she said, but you're gonna come back. And she said, you don't have to come back next year, but you need to return as something that you wanted to do, and circumstances in life may not be the right time, because it's not gonna happen. And then I left, but I came back in 2009, and I returned to Howard. And that first day, when I walked into that same professor's room, she's like, I knew you would be back. And then I graduated in 2012. So I'm very proud of myself for going through it, because everything is waves and ebbs and flows. It doesn't have to be some linear pathway. You just can commit yourself to something and getting there. So that's good.
Yeah. So applicable to my own. But anyway, we'll just leave that. Thank you for that. I love it.
Segue.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go into your spiritual history. So in saying that, how and where did you first learn about faith and spirituality? And does that expression still resonate for you?
So to answer the first part, like many people, it's just your faith and spirituality is coming from the home. When you're quite young, and unless you happen to be in a home where your parents are growing in their faith when they're older and when you're older, you're going to be exposed to whatever religion and spirituality they might have. So when I was very little, I grew up in the United Church. And then when we moved, we attended the United Church for a limited period of time. And then I don't recall exactly why my parents stopped attending church. They were still of faith, but they weren't attending church regularly. And they sent me to church with the Trinidadian family across the street. I really don't know why. I probably should ask what the impetus behind that was. But then I attended the Pentecostal church from when I was very little through high school. Took a brief period of time, break, and then when I attended university in Waterloo, I actually then went my second year to the Pentecostal church when I was there. But Pentecostal Church Canada, which I felt like was the church that I grew up in, compared to the Pentecostal church that I attended in the university, which I felt was far more like a Baptist church you would find in the US.
Oh, really?
Which I didn't.
In Waterloo?
Yeah, which is just a really obscure thing. And my favorite part of church has always been worship at the beginning. And it was such a beautiful space in that church. And so then when I went to the US, it reminded me, any church that I attended there reminded me of the Pentecostal church in Waterloo. But it's such an obscure thing because it's Waterloo. Like, it's not what you expect.
Right. Was there a lot, can I ask, was the community multi?
No. Because Waterloo isn't.
Right, I know, that's why I
I mean, Waterloo is a funny place, but like, the University of Waterloo and Laurier University are on the same street. There are 40,000 to 50,000 students in the Waterloo community at any given time. So the dynamic of that school, of that city, between September and April every year is drastic compared to what it is off time. Not as much in Kitchener, but it severely frames it. So there were a lot of students who attended. It was relatively close to the school, but it was still a predominantly white church. But I think that pastor at the time might have actually been American, which is what was driving things. So yeah, but I enjoyed it, and I would say my faith is up and down, and it doesn't mean the same thing to me now, faith and spirituality, as it did then. I think it's more holistic. But there's actually a side of me that wants to, and I think maybe of late, and then also through this COVID period, has connected more with my faith than it did before. I haven't found a home church here, but I actually attend virtually a church still from the States.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so I read Temple AME, African Methodist. So, yeah, that's the church that I worship at remotely.
Were you doing that? Sorry, you may have said this, but were you attending before COVID?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, maybe because it's an African American church, the energy, the messaging. Of course, also during COVID, like there was one point, I can't remember what exactly, I think it was actually on Father's Day, or exactly what it was, but the minister, like the pastor was speaking, and it wasn't divorced from the reality that was happening. And he said that this was the first time in history that protests were not being led by the church, and that there really hasn't been any time before. So we weren't trying to act like the church should not be involved in civil rights, because it always had been. And perhaps in some way, because I think it was a criticism or critique of the intersection between the church and protest and activism, and that maybe it could be organized differently or have different messaging, but that forever, especially in the US, the church has always been involved. So I appreciate like having the community of people, the way that sermons are not acting like we're living in a bubble. Like, let's not spend 3 minutes and speak about the realities that are facing and affecting the Black community globally, and then separate that idea from God or whatever it is that you're believing in. So it's definitely grown in that aspect, especially in the last couple of months, but probably in the last like 6 months, I would say.
Interesting. I know from like just speaking to, and I will say I'm not like necessarily a churchgoer, traditional, but my mom definitely, is still, of course, very into the church experience, and I love her and respect her for that. And I think she explicitly had to say to her minister, I would like you to address this because it was not being addressed. And for her still being in a community that's predominantly white, my mom is very vocal, as you know, and so is pointed to kind of highlight where people are missing, missing pieces, which does need to happen.
And that is not the first, or it will not be the last person I hear of or already know who has had to directly go to the leadership of the church and say, you need to say something. And this idea of silence during this time and what it means to your Black parishioners on one hand, and them feeling lost that they're coming to this house of worship for comfort and you're not providing it. And then secondly, that it some ways absolves the rest of the community from what's happening. Like, we're supposed to turn to our faith all the time, but especially in times of hurt and confusion, and that you should be able to pray over it, whoever you're praying to. It doesn't really matter what your house of worship is. And then I get really confused by this idea that the expectation is this is where you turn, but you can't do within the house of worship. Because at that point in time, why am I here?
Exactly.
Like, I can read scripture on my own. I can find teaching Bibles, and I can have a conversation with God anywhere.
Right.
but I'm here because you have, as a church leader, have been called to spread word and this good news to me and everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're not going to be doing that in a way that makes sense,
or is inclusive to the full experience,
to every single person who is inside of that house of worship,
mm-hmm.
then what is the point?
Yeah.
And it can't just be in this narrow lens of, well, or for some people maybe it is, but for me it can't be in this narrow lens of what you think this is supposed to look like. And it shouldn't be that you have to have a one-on-one conversation with your pastor or whomever it is,
right,
to be able to speak about the things and the reality that you're going through.
I love that. Was there anything missing in your earlier teachings for you?
Yeah, I think just this, I don't know at what point in time when I felt like it shifted,
Mm-hmm.
but before, I think it was this element of maybe like an obligation or the guilt and the shame that is associated with church and how you're supposed to live a particular life, and that you can't come wholly as yourself for absolution, that you need to be whole when you get there.
That's good.
And when I got older, I found places that truly acted upon the word that says you can come as you are. And I think, for at least for me and how I always recognized it, which is why I never was, I think, deeply committed to my faith, because I didn't ever feel like it was okay for me being who I was and then being in that place. And maybe it's interesting because I know people who still attend the same church, and seeing their kind of spiritual growth through that same place, and obviously the leadership has changed over the years and things like that, but that leadership only has such an element for the other people that you're attending church with, and that community, and how you feel that you can meld into it, that they say things today about it. And I'm like, so is it because it's changed, or you are just recognizing there was something missing before?
Right.
It's probably not the former.
Right. You started to touch on it. How is faith different from spirituality? And what does faith look like for you? And what does spirituality look like for you? Are they the same thing?
I think that faith is an element of spirituality. Some people will be like, oh, I'm not of faith, I'm spiritual. And sometimes they'll be like,
faith equaling religion?
Yeah, and that's what I think, that's how I always, when I think of faith, for me, I think of religion. But I think that is an element of spirituality, and it's just under a larger umbrella, and that they're not divorced from each other. And so for me, I think of things more holistically. I can think into myself. I have more self-awareness about what is around me. I think elements for me in spirituality is finding about yourself outside of principles of a religious text. I think that you can have spiritual experiences when, like, so one thing I'll say is that I don't do it all the time, and I really should do it more, because I do feel like a spiritual moment when I do yoga. For a living, I have to constantly be thinking.
Right.
I don't really get the luxury of turning my brain off. And when I started doing yoga, it was this time where I could sit for an hour and I cannot think about anything else. It doesn't matter how active I am in other areas of my life. If I did other types of workouts where I could be playing music in my head, or I could be thinking about what I had on my desk at work, or whatever's going on in my life, But for me, and when I think of yoga and that practice, it is a time where I'm connected to myself, I'm rooted to the earth, and all I'm doing is focusing on my breathing. And for me, that is a spiritual experience. And I don't really know the words to describe spirituality, but when I think of a feeling, it's that feeling of calmness, of being able to listen and to reflect. And that comes in so many different forms for people. And I think that you get that in religion and in faith, but that's not the only way that you get it.
Right.
And so when people say they have faith and they're not spiritual, I'm like, no, you are. That's just, spirituality is so broad. There's so many ways that people can get it. Someone's like, oh, I have like a spiritual connection to like the earth and to nature. It's the thing that resonates to, I think, our soul and our core and our being that drives spirituality, and faith is an aspect of it.
Cool. I love to hear everyone's perspectives and how nuanced and different and similar they are.
Yeah, there's a lot. I think there's a lot of commonality between people, and you just don't realize, because you don't ask those questions. Like, you just exist in them, and you don't know what somebody else thinks or how they just are,
right?
Unless you really pointedly ask, or you happen to be in some weird circumstance where you identify it, which isn't how life works.
Right, exactly. How has your faith changed or deepened, and do you mind sharing why that change occurred?
I do mind.
No worries.
And we're done. It's been great being here with everyone.
I was about to be like, okay, we're done.
Oh my gosh. I think it's deepened and changed where I've had to think about. I had to look into something bigger than myself when I continued to go through life. Up until this point, like in my life, I have had a lot of like ups and downs, like most people, traumas and things like that. But the defining moment of my life was the day that I lost my mother. And it's a weird time continuum that sometimes some elements feel like they were so recent, and then others, I'm like, wait a second. Like, I've almost lived half of my entire life without her. I lived my entire adult life without her. And I remember when it was happening. So she, interestingly enough, my dad actually he's the son of a pastor, but it's also Jamaica, so most people are. But I said before, my parents didn't attend church, but they were religious. And then at some point in time, they watched somebody, like some pastor on TV. They didn't attend church, but I can't remember when they started doing that again. But my mom when she was diagnosed, they told her it was terminal, and they just said, we will make you as comfortable as possible. And she didn't leave the hospital when she went in. She did not want my brother and me to lose faith, and never told us that she was dying. And so for that 3 months, every single day I went to the hospital, she knew it could be any day. And it was very kind of just, I don't want to use unfortunate because it's not deep enough. But she was on life support by the end. And so I didn't get this, I didn't get to in the way that I wanted to say goodbye. But I remember at that time, and then afterwards, I couldn't just be me. It wasn't possible for me to walk day to day and go through that and not be able to believe in more than myself. And to know that she literally gave those last days so that I would still have faith that she would be here. This was the fall. I dry cleaned her jacket her winter jacket. There was no sense of myself that she wouldn't be here. And so I think that was the turning point. And I just, though, didn't know how I was, or what I was supposed to look into. But I remember praying. I remember listening a lot, sitting in silence, crying in silence, and just not being around others. And that was when I had to rely on some aspect of faith, some aspect of spirituality to be able to continue day to day. And then I found over the last 15, 16 years or so, it grows and ebbs and flows and manifests itself in a way, like as I change and things become more open to me, more, I just become more knowledgeable about stuff. But like anyone, when I've had very difficult times, I absolutely rely more on my faith. I love worship music, and so I'll listen to it. I find even when I'm sitting at work and I've had an extremely difficult work times, it's what got me through. Like, and I know for myself, it was coming in and I put on some gospel and I had these playlists and I would be sitting blasting gospel in these like offices, and I didn't care because you wanted me to be at work every day, and I have to be able to turn to something more than myself. That's when I was really doing yoga. And I kept a yoga mat in my office, never brought it home. And there would be times I would just get up. Didn't matter if it was 11 a.m. or 5 o'clock at night, and I would take an hour for myself. And so it really is how it's deepened and evolved into a place where I've needed it as I continue to grow. I'm also more self-aware than I was when I was young. I just didn't know.
Interesting. So your faith, can I say, has been related to like your age, like your
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, age, life experiences, and things like that. I mean,
How old were you when your mom passed away?
I was 20. Yeah. So my entire adult life.
Mm-hmm. Would you say that before this time, before your mom passed away, your faith was still present but not as strong then?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was this thing like I just grew up with.
Right.
But I think also because of the place that I chose to worship, I wasn't as connected.
Mm.
But I also was.
Was it your choice though? I mean, ultimately, I guess.
I could have left. Like, I did leave at some point in time. Like, I just stopped going. But I think the biggest thing was that I was just doing it. Mm-hmm. Like, so many people kids, like they attend church, and then some of them really, truly grow into their faith and make a conscious decision to commit themselves. Or then others, like a lot of them, like I know Catholics, when they have to do their confirmation and different, like you get to this like 13 to 15 when you really start questioning, am I only doing this because I've been told? Yeah, and like what does this actually mean to me? And there's people that I grew up with who I still know now who were in that same church, and some of them really deeply connected with their faith their entire lives. Mm-hmm. And as adults, they consciously make the decision to be part of that religion. Mm-hmm. And there's others that turned away and then found themselves back. Right. Which I think is the best thing. I love when I hear those stories because you went through your own moment in life and then decided that this made sense for you. Right. And so I think that was what it was for me. Like it was just this thing that was present, and I really wasn't doing anything with it. Where now when I think of what it means for me, it's what I've chosen to do on my own terms. And my dad is more religious now. Right. My dad actually was, so when him being a childhood pastor and just kind of growing up in that way, he actually was baptized the year after my mom died. Oh, wow. So he was in his 60s, and he was baptized in the church that we had the funeral, and he didn't really attend that. He didn't really attend a church, and he was baptized, and it's been beautiful to watch him grow in faith at this phase in his life when he's always been a Christian, but it really means something to him. And it's just, beautiful is how I would describe it. Like that kind of transformation at that turning point in that moment in his life. And then we can connect on that in particular ways, but also not in the same way, because it's your own. It's act like religion, faith, and spirituality is completely your own.
Right. Do you speak about your faith and spirituality?
Sometimes. I have a lot of issues with a lot of people, with a lot of things.
Well, we know that. And you ain't afraid to say it. I love it.
I'm just trying to keep it real. But it's so,
and you're an Aries. Have to pull in the astrology. Anyway.
Oh, is that one? Yes. Yeah, I don't speak about it a lot because it's mine. It's something that's for me. I don't need someone else to validate it. I don't need to compare it to someone else. And truthfully, I don't care what other people are doing. Like, your relationship with whatever you believe in, whoever it is, him, she, it, is your own. So I don't need someone, like, if a wonderful gesture if somebody wants to pray over you, and I can understand that. But one aspect of what I don't like is because religion is weaponized. And it's, can I swear?
Yes.
It's not even just a swear, it's bastardized. But with so many people, they use it to attack others. I don't care what you think or do with your spirituality, religion, faith, provided that you are not using it to oppress someone else.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah. If you actually think something particular is said in your religious text, I actually don't care if you think it. However, if you are in a position where you take that belief and then try to use it to oppress someone else through legislation or through acts, then I have an issue.
Right.
But otherwise, if someone was if people weren't biased, if people were more open-minded and free-minded and could just accept that what someone says about their faith, their spirituality, religion, whatever, is their own, that's not what happens. You say it, and then someone listens to it, but not really listen. Like, they're listening. You know, like how people don't actively listen and they just listen to respond?
Right.
That is how I feel 99% of conversations start and finish.
Yeah.
I don't have the time and energy for that. So what is the point? I don't need to convince you of being anything else.
Yeah.
You have your belief, and I don't really want to entertain it.
Right.
So I tend to not speak on it. And then I have my thoughts when other people are telling me about it. I'm like, but I'm not going to say anything to you. Because I already know I have a problem with yours coming out of your mouth. So feel free. There's somebody in my social media who every single day, when he posts something, I'm so irritated, and I'm like, in my head, this is why people have a problem with Christians. This is why they think that you are trying to push your religion on them. But that's not your intent. But I can understand why it reads that way.
Why? I mean, because it's nuanced. I know what you're saying, but and I know, there can be so many messages, but what type of messaging makes you feel like he's impressing upon, instead of just saying, this is my faith? You know what I mean?
It's literally if he was walking on a random street corner saving someone.
Oh, really? Like reaching out and saying,
I went to go walk the dog, and the person on the side street committed themselves to Christ. No, they didn't. Or if they did, you did not have an organic conversation with that person to get them to a place to turn over and commit their lives to Christ. If it happens once,
amazing.
Twice,
miracle.
Every single day, or every single time you're posting. And then I also think that the form of it. It seems boastful, which is a way that it shouldn't be. That's not what religion is supposed to be.
Right. I get the vibe of like missionary work.
In the streets of the Greater Toronto area.
Right.
And so I don't particularly want to speak to that person about my faith, because from what they put into the world, I already feel judged. And I feel that I can't come from a place where I believe what I do on my own time, in my own way, and that you're going to accept it. And if I say, I'm going to say these words to you, accept them as you hear them, and do nothing else with them.
Right.
Provide me a general resource if you really feel inclined. But outside of that, no.
Yeah.
And I find that there's a lot of people, especially those who have attachment to some type of religion, who view it that way.
Right.
With like the broader context of spirituality, I think there's like a lot just more fluidity and understanding in that space, and that you can be more open to it. But I think there's just a lot of judgmental people, which is what turns so many out from religious places of worship and just religion in general. Which is that's not the point purpose, exactly. But it's unfortunately how it just is delivered.
Yeah, interesting. It makes me also to think about, just kind of backtracking to the conversation about people, and what I felt like the parallel was with like the faith and impressing their faith upon you. And not just that, but then also to like that extra piece of you not really caring necessarily whatever it is that they believe, whether it confirms or denies your belief, as long as, similar to racism, that's what I'm thinking, you know? As long, like, people can still, if they're prejudiced, then be prejudiced, as long as you don't have the opportunity to influence my life.
Exactly. Yeah, there's so many parallels. I don't need every person I love if racism didn't exist. It's not going to happen in my lifetime. But what I need is institutions to be dismantled that have oppressive systems in place. Like, that's what it comes down to. Like, leader of company, you're racist. But provided that your racist views do not impact hiring decisions, promotions, who you partner with, any aspect of your business, I actually don't care. Like, there are people very close to me who take issue with homosexuality because they tie it back to their religion.
Right.
Which, okay, I mean, whatever. So, fine, you think that way. But if you keep it to yourself, you don't treat somebody who's part of the LGBTQ plus community any different, if you are not in a position to deny them their ability to freely live their lives. I read a story, and there was a couple, a same-sex couple, that a private bakery refused to make their cake.
Oh, wow.
And they had said that they had previously couldn't find, I think they're looking for a religious leader, somebody just to perform the ceremony. Like, went to certain churches, they were said, no, all the best to you, but we won't perform the service. But then this bakery decided to do it, and then they said, oh, I can't believe it's 2020 and this is happening. I really don't care that those bakers have those views. But that couple walks in the door and they want you to make the wedding cake.
Right.
I don't know if the Human Rights Code doesn't mean anything to people anymore, but you cannot do that.
Yeah.
Not legal advice. But that's a human rights violation. Like, you as a private company do not have the right to do that. So I think that's how it transfers itself into marginalized communities is the same thing for how I view someone's faith and spirituality. It's your own. So keep your views to yourself and just carry on and exist. And we don't have to agree, but we have to respect each other and literally just treat each other exactly how you want to be treated. That very simple thing that the 3-year-olds were taught on the carpet. Like nothing has changed.
We sat in a circle on
We
the
sat in a
letter.
circle,
Right?
there was a song, and you learned it before you could tie a shoe or put anything together. And your parents were like, "What did you learn in school?" The Golden Rule. Like that's it. Like, that's it. So it just ties to everything. It ties to faith and spirituality.
Definitely. And I think I just have to say that's something that we are actually, I feel like we're taught the opposite of, like vilify people because they are that way. Like, who cares about the golden rule? It doesn't apply to this situation, when it so very much does. So the last few questions. What is in your spiritual toolbox? What are your go-to tools?
In what way?
In regards to like how you maintain your faith, how you maintain your spirituality, how you practice your faith, how you practice your spirituality. So tools could be like tangible tools or intangible. So whether it's like tangible tool, your Bible, or intangible tool, I mean, it's hard to say.
Yeah, it is. I think
relationships could be intangible.
Oh, okay. So I'll add intangible tool relationship to my kid. I think with most people, when it comes to relationships at least, that when you're looking for a particular response or type of response, you go to the person in your community who's going to
Affirm.
Or provide what you need in that instance, but typically to affirm. So I would say intangibly, when I need a spiritual boost or connection, there are specific people that I will go to, and it's like my own form of confession. And
I love that.
They provide healing and advice in their own way, and they're all have different facets of their spirituality, so it comes in different forms. So I really rely on that quite heavily. I pray, and
another intangible, technically,
and then reading, I guess, scripture would be my tangible. And I sit in some version of silence. I don't know if it would be considered meditation or not.
It doesn't have to be one. I'll say, just to interject quickly, a lot of people think like meditation has to be when it can just be you being in silence.
Well, I guess we meditate. But sometimes people will message me and say, "What are you doing?" Let's say, I'm like staring into space.
Right.
And they, "What? You okay?" And I'm like, yeah, I'm good. I just needed this time for myself. And I think COVID is especially amplifies the need for that. And then the other aspect where I get a lot of like healing and just moments is through physical activity. So I often just can't focus on other things. But when I'm in that moment, my energies are turned inwards. Which I guess mostly it's also intangible.
Definitely. It's like an integrated, experience.
Yeah.
Interesting. What is up next for you in this realm of learning, spirituality, faith, and self-development? Because I feel like it all ties in.
It does. There's a lot of like traumas and hardships and other things that are going on right now, and so I try to take. Like, I've been very fortunate and blessed in my COVID situation. I have a roof over my head. I've been healthy. I have food on the table. My loved ones have been, for the most part, okay. I do have family members that have COVID, but they're doing okay so far. I have employment. I acknowledge my privilege of the type of employment that I have, that not only did I change jobs in the middle of COVID, but I can work seamlessly at home feels like relatively indefinitely. So not having to worry about those very large basics, I've been able to kind of say, well, how do I grow myself through this time? And I think I spent a little bit of time just taking in access to information because I've had more free time to do it. So in very small fractions, but I've like read a little bit about astrology. Somebody sent me some Myers-Briggs.
Yeah.
So somebody,
Indicator. Yeah. MBTI.
I think I'm maybe an adventurer.
Okay.
I'd have to check.
Right.
But that I was reading a little bit more about Enneagrams. I was like, I'm not a podcast person, but somebody sent me a podcast on it, and then I asked somebody else, have you heard of an Enneagram? What's your number? But not like I'm going to become an expert in any one of these areas, but I found it very interesting to learn a little bit more about myself in those perspectives. And really just kind of seeing like what that looks like. I think it's one of those things that probably when I was younger, maybe like 10 years ago, not even that long ago, I might not subscribe to it, but now I'm far more curious. And so I'd like to hear more, I'd like to read more about it. And then also finding out what's important. I've said to so many people during COVID, everything is stripped down. Like there's nothing else to focus on. So at the end of the day, if your basic life necessities are taken care of, you look and you say, who's in my life? How is my life doing? And so I've really been asking, like, what do I want for myself? What's important? I have a job that I enjoy and brings me professional satisfaction. Like that's a element of my being. And so I'm trying to take this time to really reflect on where I am in my life, where I want it to go. I'm not exactly sure, but self-growth is a lifelong process. And now I just have like a really good window to do it because the world's in a pandemic.
As we laugh.
If you can't laugh at the reality,
I know.
So, well, somebody sent me this thing this morning, and it said, "I think I'm considered a Zennial, or elder millennial."
Well, elder millennial.
Elder millennial.
I'm the elder millennial. I'm right at the cusp.
I'm apparently considered one, but I didn't steal that, or I'm not stealing it. There's I can't remember the comedian's name, but look it up on Netflix. Okay. She has one of her specials called Elder Millennial, and I think she's a year older than me.
Okay, I'll try to tag it down below.
Yeah. So,
just a reference.
Sure.
Not stealing anybody's stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. But the thing that somebody sent to me was, you were coming through high school and it was 9/11. You started your working life in 2008 during the financial crisis, and now as you are raising families, you're going through a global pandemic. How's your life going? And I was like, oh, right. There's been some things that have happened in this world in the last 20 years of my existence. Last one pointed out. So I feel like, how are you doing? I'm feeling good. All things considered.
All things considered. We're pretty, not bad. Last question. Your faith message. If you could share a message about faith, what would it be?
I probably said it earlier, but your faith is your own. And feel comfortable in knowing that, feel whole in knowing that, and that you don't have to prove anything about your faith and how that translates into who you are to anyone but yourself and whomever it is, whatever it is that you subscribe to.
Love it. That's so much empowerment in itself.
It is. It's freeing. It's very freeing to get to a place where you can believe something or in something and be okay that it's just yours.
Mhm.
And it shapes itself in its own, the way that makes sense for you.
Definitely. I subscribe to that.
Yes!
100%. Yay.
I can't snap.
I'll snap. One hand, I can snap. Anyway, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited. We're obviously going to have another conversation. So
Right.
thank you for being here too. And we'll see you next time. Ciao, ciao.